She's currently the associate producer for Bleacher Report, and she worked on Inside the NBA on TNT. We have the pleasure of welcoming Morgan Allison onto Hoopsology. How's it going, Morgan?
It's going great. How you guys doing?
Doing really well. Thanks for joining us. And it's tradition on our show, since we focus not only on the NBA, just basketball culture overall, just to ask our guests about their connection to the game itself. So, what is your favorite basketball memory or your first basketball memory, any way you want to take it?
Sure. So I think to kind of go back to the beginning a little bit, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. So obviously big LeBron fan. When I was young, I played basketball growing up. My dad was a coach, so I feel like I kind of got introduced into the world of basketball through him. And I'll never forget the day he came home and said we were going to go to a high school basketball game, and we are going to go watch LeBron. And it was a very cool, unique experience for me because when we walked in, there was not anywhere to sit. And I remember saying, Dad, why can't we sit down? Like, why are we standing? And he pointed to LeBron and he was like, well, that's why. And it was just an amazing thing to see in person. I think I played basketball before then, but then seeing him and then somebody that was from Cleveland, it was such a cool experience. And then I went to play AAU and I played high school. And with my dad being a coach, I feel like it was something that we bonded over. So we ended up watching games on TV. We ended up watching college, NBA, literally anything we could get our hands on. So that was really my first basketball memory and probably one of my favorites.
Can you describe your journey to production? So you mentioned you played basketball growing up,
Mhm.
and you now get on the opposite, the media inside of things. What was that journey like for you?
Definitely. I think as I got into high school and was getting ready to figure out what I wanted to do in college, I knew I wanted to work in sports, and I liked journalism. I liked media. I liked writing, reporting. So I kind of knew that was going to be my major. What I didn't realize is that I was going to be behind the camera. So when I first started out, I wanted to be on air. I wanted to be a sideline reporter, which I feel like a lot of people do. And then I had my first internship my senior year of college, and I fell in love with the behind the scenes and the aspects of production and the creativity and the real storytelling that you could do from a producer's perspective. So through that internship, I was like, okay, let me see what production's all about. And after I graduated college at West Virginia University, shout out Mountaineers, I got my first real sports journalism job at ESPN up in Bristol. And that's when I was a production assistant. I was working on Sports Center. I was working on cutting highlights for these studio shows. And while I loved and learned a lot there, I realized that right then and there that I was like, I just miss basketball. So from ESPN, I made the transition to Turner, NBA on TNT and NBA TV. And what I loved about it was that like my main priority was basketball. I could focus solely on the NBA and less on some of the other sports I was covering at ESPN. So that's kind of how I ended up down in Atlanta at Turner.
So, can you go over the environment of Inside the NBA? It's just a show I've been growing up watching. I think for unanimously through basketball fans, the best show on television, not only basketball, but it's television period. It's right up there. So, can you just decide? Can it go over just the environment to foster that creativity, to foster that laid back attitude that us Matt and I see as the viewer at home, we enjoy it every week. What kind of fosters that in product?
100%. That's what I love about the show. It's definitely like a family. The people that have worked on it for a very long time. It's kind of like a well-oiled machine at this point. But one of the longtime producers, TK, one of his favorite sayings is ideas come from anywhere. And they essentially will allow anyone at the company to pitch ideas and to brainstorm and to work through them and to ideate. It's just a very open and honest place when it comes to communication and coming up with some of these crazy ideas that they do on the show. I've had the nice opportunity to be a part of a bunch of those Nito stat of the nights where I've been at a brainstorm on a
Awesome.
Monday and then seeing it come to fruition on a Thursday. So it's very, very cool when something like that, like an idea that you pitch or an idea that you workshop with other coworkers, gets to make it to the final show. But yeah, I think just fostering that creativity by allowing ideas come from anywhere, brainstorm, workshopping things, and really being open to make fun of themselves as well. I think that opens so many doors when you're don't take it too seriously and you let the viewer at home know that you're having a good time.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like, I mean, such a symbiotic benefit there that you have anyone pitching ideas so everyone's motivated that they know that that could develop into something there. Do you find that it's really unique to not necessarily just Turner, but in media overall? Is that pretty unique to see that open of a policy, or do you think more and more places adapt that as we press on in time here?
I think as with social media, we are starting to notice a lot of that. I think people
Mhm.
now are taking the humorous approach. They're taking more of the lightheartedness approach to covering sports because I think, truthfully, I think the pandemic had a lot to do with that. I
Yeah.
think during the NBA bubble and during the pandemic, we realized that sports are an escape, and that as fans, we missed it so much. And I think we realize that there are other more serious things going on in the world. So it's like, let's have some fun. Let's bring some light into these people's living rooms. And I think a lot more people are starting to, media companies specifically, are starting to kind of switch to that take a little bit. And then with the side of social media, you're allowing your on air talent and your personalities to really shine and to have better access to fans. So I definitely see a change in that specifically in the last like 2 to 3 years.
Now, I've always wanted to ask this question. It's one of my favorite segments on Inside the NBA, and that is Shaq and a Fool. And I think it's gone through different iterations. And I just want to get kind of the beginning process of when you pick in the plays to talking to Shaq and developing the memes as well, because I think the your guys' memes are untouched and just the internet as well. It's just pretty incredible. Because can you take us through that creative process?
Sure. So last year, it's kind of a great question because last year was my first year really getting involved with Shaq and a Fool. There is one creative brain kind of leading the charge there. His name is Chan Traub. He's one of my coworkers. Great, great guy. But essentially, it's a team effort, and it's a lot of people brainstorming in a room, coming up with the plays. And then we have an extremely talented VFX artists, graphic artists that do the photoshops and the cutouts. And what I think really helps too is having people involved in those brainstorms that aren't just familiar with what's going on in the NBA currently, but are super involved with knowing what the show's history is. So that's one of my favorite parts of Shaq is when they bring back moments from Shaq and Chuck from 10 plus years ago. And there's people in these meetings and in these creative ideation sessions that know the show inside and out. And they'll be like, oh, I think this moment would work great from like 15 years ago. And you're just like, what? So having those people in the room that may necessarily not know the league currently right now, but know the history of inside is super smart and super helpful.
Are there any memorable Shaq in the Full moments that come to mind
Oh
that
yeah.
got a huge reaction, or were you like really worried about the players' reaction? You're like, oh, I don't know if they took that well.
Definitely the players one's always a little dicey, especially when Shaq and Chuck get going, especially on the reactions. I will say one of my most recent favorite ones was we called him Mop Guy, and it was a guy that essentially was mopping the floor, the sweat of the floor, and we ended up cutting him out and then using him multiple times through multiple weeks of the season. And we would have him come in and out multiple times. So that was a really fun one to do and just so random. But like sometimes the most random things get great reactions. And then the writing of the script is also really fun because we have to come up with like something that Shaq will feel comfortable saying, but then also make it try either rhyme or be funny. So I feel like the script writing is like an underrated part of Shaq and a Fool. Obviously, the visuals are amazing, but like sometimes the delivery that Shaq uses is amazing as well.
So want to zoom out a tiny bit. We don't often have folks involved in production like you are, Morgan, on the show. And can you just put into perspective? I mean, you don't have to go into great detail, but I guess I'm wondering just on like a night of inside the NBA, what is the process from like start to finish, like getting through that show? How much production is going on beforehand and planning? I assume quite a bit
Mhm.
to getting that produced and aired and then closing out for the night. Can you just kind of walk us through a typical night on that show from what you've seen?
For sure. Especially now with actually TNT having two NBA nights. So games are on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So a
Mm.
lot of the times with those crews, they split the crews. So essentially the same crew isn't working both nights. Because like you mentioned, it's a lot of preparation and pre-producing on the front end. So if you're usually working the Tuesday nights, you don't work Thursday. If you're working the Thursday nights, you don't work Tuesday, depending hit or miss here and there. But a lot of the time it's the producer and the director kind of orchestrating their plan early on in the week and then relying on all the other crew members to come up with ideas as well and work together. I would say a typical night you get in to the studio maybe around 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you get done around 2 a.m. They're very long days, very long nights, but it's one of the most fun experiences of Inside is not when the show is going on, but when the show is in break and you're all in one room watching the games together. So that's another aspect that I really love. Maybe Shaq and Chuck are doing some shenanigans or falling asleep in their chair or whatever they may be doing. But it is long nights and it's long hours and a lot of prep on the front, but it's so fun and so worth it.
Can you go over just the impromptu moments as well? Because it seems like there's also some breaking news that happens. I think what
Mhm.
comes to mind, I think it was the Clippers and I think the Rockets. I maybe might be mistaken, but there was. I think the cops came in there and they were worried about like some kind of brawl taking place, and I think Shaq
Austin
and
Rivers, I
Charles,
think. Yeah.
yeah, they were like, "This is ridiculous. Why are the cops here?" And I think they had the silent reporter totally cracking up. There's just a lot of those impromptu moments that
Oh
they don't
yeah.
seem planned, but they're the best moments of the show. Can you kind of go over kind of how you take advantage of those moments?
Totally. I also think that they trust each other, right? Everybody on the show trusts each other. And I think in order for impromptu moments to work, you need to trust. You need to know when to let them go and when to rein them in, right? I think Ernie obviously does a great job of that. But from a production spot as well, like you need to know when to let things roll and then when to wrap things up. So I think sometimes people might be a little quick to jump the gun and be like, let's halt the brakes here. We're getting into crazy territory. But sometimes that's when the best moments happen. So I think it's finding that balance of trust with your talent and then also like trust with your production crew. And then obviously them having trust with each other and with all the sideline reporters. Like it really is like a family and everybody has that crazy uncle, right? So I think that that's kind of how it is, and it's just finding that balance.
So we've seen other networks, other leagues try to emulate inside the NBA, and usually it does not go well or they abandon it. What do you think in terms of their approaches was gone wrong? Because it seems like on surface a pretty easy formula to emulate, but in execution it is not. And like you were stating earlier, it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of preparation, and there's a lot of planning to execute the vision of inside the NBA. What do you think has gone wrong with just the other leagues that have tried to kind of emulate that style?
Just similar to basketball itself, chemistry. I think chemistry is huge. I think chemistry among talent is sometimes it can't be forced. It has to be natural. I think that's something that obviously Inside has going for it for how long they've been on the air. That just comes with time. I also think like I mentioned earlier, like being able to make fun of yourself is such a key skill. I think sometimes on other networks, it feels a little too stuffy. It feels a little too serious. It feels a little too X's and O's and analytical. We all love basketball. I feel like our fans love basketball. They know basketball, but sometimes they tune into Inside for more than just that. And I think remembering that also it's entertainment at the end of the day. So it's definitely something that is hard to copy for sure.
Do you have any memorable moments in terms of just working on inside the NBA, those late nights? Does anything come to mind with this Shaq or Charles or Kenny, just in
Yeah.
terms of kind of any bizarre stories that you can think of?
One of my personal faves is so since I'm from Cleveland, I'm a big Cleveland sports fan. And as you guys know, when a playoff team gets eliminated, they do gone fishing. So one of the years, it was right around it was NFL playoffs, believe it or not, and the Browns had just eliminated the Steelers from the playoffs. The Browns got their first playoff win in I don't know how long, like 13 years. And they did a Steelers Gone Fishing on the show, which I was featured in, which was awesome. My picture was on Gone Fishing. And
Awesome.
Nice.
Hearing Shaq and Chuck say, "Oh, there's Morgan," like on the Gone Fishing was just like, 10-year-old me would not believe it, right? Like I'm on inside for real. Like that was kind of one of my favorite moments personally, just because I got a little bit of clout there.
Want to ask you about just kind of more broadly modern sports media. It seems like on the journalism side, and I'm sure on the production side as well. I guess my question is, do you ever feel like you get time off with the way information travels now with social media? Do you ever feel like there are nights off?
Yeah, I will say they're getting few and far between, it feels like, especially with the way the season's working and the play-in tournament and all of that. But August is a great month. I'll put it that way. August is a light month for everybody. Take our vacations, go to the beach, do what you got to do. But everyone knows that it's a pretty much a grind for X amount of months per year. But it's also so fun. There's certain events like I just got back from All Star, Summer League, Draft. That even though they technically aren't during the regular season, it's a great way for the media and everybody to all get together and network and talk about what's going on with them in their personal lives in and outside of work. So, yes, it's gotten busier. Yes, it's gotten more crazy, but there is sometimes you can steal here and there.
And it seems like on the production side, I guess I'd be curious of your perspective. I mean, it seems like you have to stay as well or just about as well informed about what's going on as like the sports writer side because you all are helping with the writing of what you're producing. Do you think I mean it's about neck and neck between the sports journalists and sports producers, maybe even more so on the production side?
Yeah, we always laugh that reporters can always just say reports and get away with pretty much saying anything because it's not necessarily fair. But yeah, with production, I mean, essentially, once you put it on the air or put it on a graphic or say it out loud, it's definitely there forever, right? So there's a little bit more finality with that, I feel like. And then, especially with NBA on TNT being like essentially a league partner, we have to be very careful about what we report and how we report it and how it makes the league look. Just because we're not necessarily there to like break news first, we want to be right. So I think that there's definitely an aspect to that that's different from reporting in the sense that we need to clear everything and make sure we're good before we just jump on it. Whereas sometimes I think reporters to their knowledge are trying to get it out as quickly as possible, but with us I think it's a little bit more, let's wait a beat, make sure this is right, make sure this is in the right tone of voice, make sure this is what we want to portray, which is nice and it makes you feel good, but there are those moments when breaking news happens and you have to do something quickly that can be extremely nerve-wracking.
So, Morgan, I want to ask you about Bleacher Report because I think it's one of the most unique sites covering sports on the web. And I love your guys' content, in particular, Taylor Rooks' interviews as well. I think those are really fascinating to watch. Can you kind of walk us through your philosophy in terms of the sports coverage you want to bring to sports fan that separates yourself from the other big sites out there?
For sure. Bleacher Report, we like to say, is at the intersection of sports and pop culture. So essentially, we are trying to use Bleacher Report to get to a little bit of our younger audience, but then also get to people that may not be the crazy hoop head like on NBA TNT. So we're trying to, first of all, we cover all sports, not just NBA, which is awesome, and then pop culture as well. So kind of intersecting those memes that you might see on Shaqton, but like amplifying them in a fun, unique way, is kind of Bleacher Report's voice. Another thing that I love about Bleacher Report, and if I sound like too much of a homer, that's okay, but the app alerts that they do with their app, I think is sets them apart from a lot of other sports apps. They use a tone of voice and a language that we are all familiar with talking when we talk about sports with our buddies on the couch or with our family or with our friends. And I think it's really smart and it's a really good way to get people that may not be crazy fans into becoming Bleacher Report fans.
Can you discuss the potential of Bleacher Report and the app in particular? Because I've used the app just to watch, AEW with their partnership with TNT. I've noticed other events for pay-per-view being integrated into the Bleacher Report app. Where do you see it going? Do you see it being more of a competitor to the Zone, ESPN Plus, kind of all in one, news source, but also presenting events? Where do you think the app's future, if you were to get to not, if things are secret, you have to get those away, but just to your, I guess predictions, where do you see the app moving into the future?
I think recently as we've all seen, is a ton of live streams. So watching like a Taylor Rooks interview live in the BR app is definitely a push that we're doing. Is a lot more live streams, and then catering to team specific fans with video content. So if you were a fan of, like, say, the Atlanta Hawks, and you were following the Atlanta Hawks page within the BR app, I think we're trying to come up with content, whether that's historical career video or tweets from the players currently. We're trying to kind of cater to the team specific part of the BR app, as well as really get into the live streams, and then just show off the access that we have. It's a very unique situation with BR and Turner kind of working hand in hand. So BR is having similar access to what NBA on TNT has, and vice versa. So kind of working that partnership into the app, and really just using that access to bring fans like as close to the game as possible.
It's interesting, some of the content that we've put out. What has caught fire the most that I've noticed is team specific coverage, which I wouldn't have expected compared to some of the other things that we've put out. But to me, it kind of speaks to maybe there is still this like hardcore team fan following, even though, especially in the NBA world, we always talk about like modern day fans being fans of players more so than teams. But is that something you notice from Bleacher Report? Like, is there still a huge appetite for the team specific news, or what is kind of your perspective from that view of things?
Yeah, I think like you hit the nail on the head with the hardcore fans. I think there still is that group of people that will be a hardcore fan. I think with the way the player movement has been in the league, specifically as of late, like Russell Westbrook, right? Perfect example, playing for a different LA team in a couple days. So I think seeing that change and seeing the player movement, definitely with a younger audience, I feel like they're more player focused. I feel with the older audience, they're definitely more team focused. I feel like I kind of fall somewhere in between. With being a millennial, I feel like I grew up in Cleveland. Like I said, I'm a huge Cleveland sports fan for everything. I also think it's geographical, right? A little bit. So, like, depending on where you grew up, and if your parents or your grandparents or people in your family rooted for certain teams, it can be generational at the same time. But I think there's still an appetite for it. I just think that the younger generation is definitely leaning more towards the player angle.
And with that, how do you incorporate what Draymond Green would say, new media, plus players actually taking control of their narrative and now having their own platforms to present their own stories, bypassing just dealing with reporters or trying to get on a network, or doing both, or having their platform and then also, being on a traditional network? How do you kind of, incorporate, that rising medium as well?
Yeah, I think it's great. I actually really enjoy, that type of content. As somebody that works in production, I feel like it's refreshing. I think that truthfully, a lot of these athletes get involved and they realize that there's a lot more to it than what they thought originally, and that there's a lot of moving parts behind the scenes that maybe they weren't aware of before. But I like listening to it. I like watching it. I like digesting that content. I think it's super interesting. Jamal Crawford, I think, comes to mind. He is a new addition to the TNT Tuesday crew this year. Was never really involved with social media. Notoriously had a BlackBerry for years and years and years, and then this year has kind of blossomed onto the set, and then started his own social media. He has his own segment now on NBA TV called like Crawford's Couch, where he interviews current players on couch. So I think it's really, unique and refreshing to see players kind of take it into their own hands. And I really like it.
Allison, this has been a fantastic chat. Morgan, I'm sorry, my mistake. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Can you please let us know where they can find you on social media? What kind of upcoming projects that you're working on as well?
Sure. My personal handle on Instagram and Twitter is Morgan Farr Allison. Morgan Farr Allison, Allison. A lot of my content that I produce for Bleacher Report is on the Bleacher Report TikTok page, and then for Inside the NBA every Thursday nights. And I'm excited to see where the rest of the season goes.
Awesome, Morgan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys, for having me.